Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're looking for that shortcut, that way to get deeply informed about, well, some pretty intense history, ancient politics, power, scandal, you're definitely in the right place. Today, we are diving headfirst into Imperial Rome. Specifically, around 48 AD. It's a period where, honestly, the government feels like this wild mix of fear, sheer brilliance, and just insatiable appetites.
It really does. And the sources we have, they paint such a vivid picture. It's almost sensory overload. You have to imagine Rome not just as marble buildings, but the sounds, the constant clatter of hooves, maybe war chariots rumbling.
And the smells, too.
Oh, definitely. That heavy scent of olive oil everywhere mixing with, expensive perfumes in the palace. But then underneath it all, that faint rot from the Tiber River. It's intense.
That whole atmosphere, the sensory overload, but also the sense of danger. It feels critical to understanding this time. The imperial palace itself, all cool marble and silk, it's supposed to project power, stability, right? But everyone inside knew, didn't they? One wrong word, one whisper, and the Praetorian Guard could be at your door before sunrise.
Absolutely. Fear wasn't just like an occasional thing. It was the currency, how you survived day to day.
And sort of presiding over this whole pressure cooker, especially in the social and maybe the behind-the-scenes political world, was Valeria Messalina.
Yeah, and the way our sources portray her, it's as this figure of just stunning, almost reckless ambition. Power wasn't something she just had. She used it like a weapon. Or maybe, like you said, a flame.
A flame that could, as one account darkly suggests, burn the empire to ash.
Precisely. She seemed willing to risk everything.
Okay, so let's try and unpack this huge subject. Our mission today, it's sort of twofold, isn't it?
It is.
First, we really need to unravel Messalina herself, her life, both political and personal. I mean, how does this young woman become such a central and frankly lethal figure in that whole Julio-Claudian mess? We need to look past just the scandals.
Right. See the cold, hard political calculations beneath the headlines.
And second, and this is crucial for understanding the sheer brutality of Roman power, we have to dive into something much darker, much more hidden.
The silent horrors, as we've called them. The lives of the plura delicati, the male concubines.
Their suffering, it was systemic, wasn't it? Institutionalized. And horrifyingly, for the Roman elite, it seems it was just normal.
Yeah.
It's unremarkable as buying bread.
Yeah, just part of the fabric of life for the powerful.
So we're pulling together insights from big names, Tacitus, Suetonius, Cassius Dio, also Juvenal, Pliny the Elder. And we have to be upfront, these accounts sometimes clash or they clearly have an agenda, right?
Oh, absolutely. Especially when you get into the more scandalous stuff. Propaganda is definitely a factor.
Our goal isn't really to judge, though. It's more to witness, to understand this world where power was just utterly raw, a sharp blade ready to cut, where youth was a commodity and having a voice could get you killed. So to really get Messalina, you have to start with her family, her background. She wasn't some nobody who clawed her way up. She started at the top, born around, 20 AD?
Yeah, about then. And she was born into a world where your lineage, your name, that was almost everything. Ambition and pedigree were completely tangled up.
Her father, Marcus Valerius Messala Barbatus, he was a consul. That's serious traditional Roman clout right there.
Huge. But it's her mother, Domitia Lepida the Younger. That's where the really politically charged connections come in, the dangerous ones.
Dangerous how?
Well, Domitius was plugged right into the heart of the imperial family. She was the sister of Nero's father, and maybe even more critically, she was a cousin to Caligula, the emperor who'd just been assassinated.
Wow, okay. So not exactly a quiet childhood then.
Probably not. Imagine growing up, not just playing games, but doing it on the Palatine Hill, in those fancy gardens, fountains spraying over laurel hedges.
Sounds nice.
But the background noise isn't birds. It's these intense, probably hushed conversations between powerful Romans, senators, matrons, talking constantly about marriage alliances, who's up, who's down, succession.
So she's absorbing all this political maneuvering from day one, like tracing frescoes of nymphs while listening to deals being cut.
Exactly. She learned early on that her life, her marriageability, was a massive political asset.
And that asset gets cashed in pretty early. Around 38 AD, she's maybe only 18.
Could be. Somewhere around there.
And she's married off to Claudius, who's, he's 48.
Yeah.
30 years older.
Yeah, the age gap alone is stark. But it's more than that. You've got this young, ambitious woman paired with a man who, honestly, most people had written off.
Claudius.
Right.
Sources are pretty clear he wasn't exactly seen as emperor material before Well, before he actually became emperor.
Not at all. He was kind of a figure of mockery for many in the elite. They mentioned his limp, the stammer, sometimes a drooping mouth. He was seen as physically frail, maybe not all there mentally.
But he had survived, hadn't he?
Yeah.
Through Tiberius, through Caligula.
Yeah.
That's no small feat in that family.
He had the ultimate survival skill. He made himself seem unimportant. He literally hid himself away in scholarship, always writing, always copying histories, ink-stained hands.
He avoided the spotlight. The spotlight that got so many other Julio-Claudians killed.
Precisely. He played the harmless scholar, and it worked. Until suddenly, it didn't need to anymore.
So the wedding itself was a big deal?
Oh, huge public spectacle. It had to be. It was about showing the continuation of the line, securing things, think chanting priests, silk canopies, all the fancy guests.
But underneath all the pomp, people were whispering, right? About the politics of it all.
Absolutely. Everyone knew this was about alliance, about bloodlines, not about love. It was a calculated move.
And the calculation paid off, politically speaking, almost right away. They had children quickly.
Yep. Claudia Octavia, born maybe 39 or 40 AD. And then the crucial one, the boy, Tiberius Claudius Germanicus, who we know as Britannicus, who was born in 41 AD.
A male heir. That cements Messalina's position, and it shores up Claudius's shaky claim to power, right?
Absolutely essential, especially given what happens right around the time Britannicus is born.
The earthquake.
Oh.
41 AD. Caligula's assassination.
Brutal. Cut down by daggers right in the palace. The whole city must have just held its breath. Who's next? Is it civil war?
And Claudius's rise. It's almost comical if it wasn't so deadly serious. The Praetorians find him hiding.
Literally hiding behind a curtain. They were probably looking for loot, or maybe just trying to figure out who to back next to avoid total chaos. They find Claudius cowering, terrified he's next on the list.
And they just make him emperor.
Pretty much dragged him out, hailed him emperor on the spot, forced the title on him. It was probably the quickest way to stop Rome from descending into mob rule right then and there.
So in that moment of chaos, Messalina, barely 21 years old, she goes from being the wife of the weird uncle to Empress of the Roman world.
Instantly. Thrust into this position of unbelievable power, sudden, massive, and probably felt very insecure at first.
And she becomes that flame in a court of shadows. You can see how she'd immediately start using those political lessons she soaked up as a kid, how to survive, how to consolidate power.
Absolutely. She didn't waste any time.
Okay, so she's empress. But we need to look beyond just wife of the emperor. The sources suggest she was way more active, more predatory, politically speaking.
Definitely. She didn't seem content to just rely on Claudius's affection or status. She understood power dynamics. She knew Claudius depended on others to run things, and she moved quickly to control those levers of power herself.
And her strategy was interesting, wasn't it? She didn't really focus on the traditional power center, the Senate.
No, that's what's fascinating. She kind of sidestepped the old aristocracy. Instead, she zeroed in on Claudius's inner circle, his most powerful former slaves, the freedmen.
Why them? Why would these ex-slaves be more useful than, say, powerful senators?
Well, a couple reasons. They had Claudius's ear constantly, direct access. And maybe more importantly, unlike senators who had their own family prestige and wealth, these freedmen owed everything to Claudius. Their status, their immense wealth, it all came from him. They were totally dependent.
Making them more controllable. Or maybe more loyal to whoever seemed to be winning.
Possibly both. Two figures really stand out in the sources. Narcissus and Pallas.
Okay, tell us about them. Narcissus first.
Narcissus was basically Claudius's chief of staff, his secretary. He handled the emperor's correspondence, intelligence gathering. Tacitus hints that his eyes miss nothing happening in Rome. He was the information gatekeeper. Cunning.
And Pallas.
Pallas ran the imperial treasury. He controlled the money. And the sources suggest he became incredibly wealthy himself, richer than most senators.
Wow. So control the information flow through Narcissus, control the money flow through Pallas.
And you've basically got a stranglehold on the day-to-day running of the empire, all happening outside the traditional Senate channels. Messalina allied herself tightly with these two. Tacitus really nails it when he describes her ambitions, saying her mind was as sharp as the daggers hidden in senators' cloaks.
Sharp and ruthless. She used this power base to take out threats, didn't she? And sometimes just people who slighted her.
Oh, yeah. The execution of Appius Junius Silanus in 42 AD is a perfect, chilling example. It shows just how she operated.
What happened there?
Well, initially, Messalina seems to have tried to bring Silanus closer, maybe control him, by arranging for him to marry her own mother, Domitia.
Okay.
But Silanus apparently wasn't playing ball. The sources suggest he rebuffed Messalina's advances, whether personal or political, it's unclear, but he rejected her influence.
Big mistake.
Huge mistake.
Right.
For Messalina, this wasn't just a personal snub, it was a challenge to her power. Intolerable.
So what did she do?
She didn't confront him directly. She used her network. She fabricated a story, probably about treason or conspiracy. She whispered it to Narcissus.
Her ally.
Exactly. And Narcissus, knowing which way the wind was blowing, immediately goes to Claudius, wakes him up, feeds him the story, plays on the emperor's known anxieties about plots.
And Claudius.
Panicked. Urged on by Narcissus, his trusted freedman, he ordered Silanus executed immediately. No trial, no hearing, nothing.
Just like that.
Just like that. And the next thing you know, Silanus' body is being displayed on the Gemonian stairs, the place they threw the bodies of traitors, blood staining the steps.
That sends a message, doesn't it?
A loud and clear one: don't cross the Empress. All she needs is a whisper in the right ear, and you're finished.
And it wasn't just major political figures she targeted. She could be petty too, right? Personal grudges.
Definitely. Cassius Dio talks about her rivalry with Julia Livilla, Caligula's sister.
What was the issue there?
Apparently simple jealousy over beauty. Messalina couldn't stand having another woman at court who was widely considered beautiful, especially one with such strong Julio-Claudian connections.
So what did she do to Livilla?
Well, again, it looked personal, but it also conveniently removed a potential figurehead for opposition. Messalina orchestrated Livilla's exile in 41 AD, sent her off to Pandataria.
Which was?
A horrible place. A barren, windswept island used for exiling inconvenient people. Basically a death sentence, just a slow one.
And there are letters, aren't there, describing her suffering?
Yeah, smuggled out somehow. They speak of hunger, cold, just wasting away under the sun. Messalina wasn't just content with getting rid of rivals. She wanted them to suffer, it seems. Or at least she wanted everyone to know they suffered.
It's about consolidating power through sheer terror, isn't it? Making sure everyone knew who was really pulling the strings behind the often distracted emperor, extinguishing any opposition, real or just perceived.
Okay, so now we get to the part of the story that Messalina is most famous for. Or infamous, I should say. The legends about her sexual behavior.
Right, and this is where, as you said earlier, we really have to be careful, listeners. We need to try and separate historical possibility from what was likely political slander, especially given who wrote these accounts down.
Exactly, because the stories are wild. We start with her alleged pursuit of Menestor. He was a famous Greek actor.
Suetonius writes about this in his Life of Claudius, doesn't he?
He does, very clearly. He said Messalina was obsessed. She used her power as empress to summon him to her private chambers. You get these descriptions: rooms scented with extensive rose water, heavy silk curtains muffling everything, creating this atmosphere of illicit luxury.
And Mestor. Was he willing?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. Suetonius says he initially refused. Which, think about that, an actor, probably a slave or freedman, refusing the empress. That's incredibly dangerous.
What were the consequences for refusing?
Usually exile or death. Pretty straightforward. So Menestor eventually gave in, but the implication is clear. His compliance wasn't about desire, it was self-preservation. It was, as one analysis puts it, a performance born of survival.
So she's using the power of the state for personal gratification.
That's certainly the accusation, but the stories go much, much further than affairs within the palace walls.
Right, the nocturnal escapes. Juvenal.
Ah, Juvenal, the master satirist. His Satire 6 basically immortalized Messalina as the symbol of female depravity. He paints this picture of her sneaking out of the palace at night under a dark hooded cloak.
Where does he say she goes?
To the Subura, which was Rome's roughest, poorest, most notorious district, full of taverns, brothels, crime, the opposite of the imperial palace. He describes the smell-spilled cheap wine, unwashed bodies.
And what does he claim she does there?
He claims she worked as a common prostitute, using the pseudonym Lysiska, lying on dirty straw pallets in some back alley room.
The Empress, working as a prostitute.
That's the shocking image Juvenal creates. He emphasizes the contrast, her cloak hiding these priceless imperial rings, symbols of ultimate power, while she's supposedly seeking out the lowest form of degradation.
Why? What's Juvenal's point?
Well, partly he's using her as a symbol to critique the moral corruption of the entire Roman elite. But he also adds this detail. He claims she'd returned to the palace at dawn, smeared with soot, physically exhausted from numerous encounters.
But still
Unfulfilled. Her pros jingling with coins, but her fundamental hunger, whatever it was, not satisfied. It's a very potent, almost mythical image.
But it is satire. We have to remember that.
Absolutely. Juvenal's goal is moral condemnation, not objective history. But these stories, true or not, were picked up and repeated. Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, takes one story and elevates it to legendary status.
This is the contest, right? The famous or infamous contest.
The prostitute contest, yeah.
Yes.
Pliny recounts this story, supposedly happening in 48 AD. Messalina allegedly challenges a woman named Scylla, apparently a well-known prostitute famous for her stamina,
And the challenges.
who could sleep with more men in a single 24-hour period, day and night.
That's unbelievable.
It really is. And Pliny reports the alleged result. Messalina claims victory, supposedly reaching a count of 25 lovers, breathless, while cheers from some unrelated event echo outside. It's designed purely for shock value.
Okay, so how do we, as critical listeners, process this? Suetonius seems more grounded. Juvenal is satire. Pliny reports this wild contest.
This is where Tacitus is really helpful. He wrote a bit later, and he offers a crucial perspective. He acknowledges that Messalina was genuinely reckless, unrestrained, probably did have affairs. The stories weren't conjured from thin air. But Tacitus explicitly warns that these tales were massively exaggerated and amplified by her enemies. Specifically Agrippina the Younger, the woman who married Claudius after Messalina was executed and who was Nero's mother.
So Agrippina had a vested interest in making Messalina look as bad as possible.
Absolutely. Agrippina wrote her own memoirs, and to secure her own position and legitimize her son Nero's future claim, she needed Messalina to be remembered not just as politically dangerous, but as utterly depraved, a monster.
So the stories of her working as a prostitute, the contest with 25 men, these become powerful propaganda tools.
Exactly. They justify the execution. They justify the damnatio memoriae, the erasure of her name. They serve Agrippina's political goals perfectly.
So whether she actually did these specific things or the extent of them is almost secondary to the fact that people believe she could or that her enemies could make others believe it. It reflects how scandal was weaponized in Roman politics.
Precisely. The truth might be lost, but the political use of the story is crystal clear. You know, despite all her cunning, her political maneuvering, the fear she inspired, Messalina's downfall, when it came in 48 AD, it wasn't a slow slide. It was incredibly fast, dramatic, and ultimately it stemmed from one colossally reckless, treasonous act.
And the timing was key, wasn't it? Claudius was distracted.
Hugely distracted. He was pouring all his energy into the conquest of Britain. That was going to be his legacy, his great military achievement. So he was often away from Rome, inspecting troops, dealing with logistics, dedicating temples.
Leaving Messalina effectively in charge back in the capital. And he trusted her, didn't he?
Seems like he trusted her completely, which, well, turned out to be a mistake. Because with him gone, she didn't just take a lover, she took a political partner in crime.
Gaius Silius.
Gaius Silius. Consul designate so, already very high-ranking. Handsome, apparently, but, crucially, he had ambition that matched Messalina's. He wasn't just eye candy. He saw a path to the throne through her.
And together, they did something unforgivable.
Treason. Plain and simple. While Claudius was out of town, down at the port of Ostia inspecting grain shipments, Messalina and Silius staged a wedding. A full, formal, public wedding ceremony in Rome.
Wait, a wedding? While she's still married to the emperor, how does that even work?
It doesn't, legally, unless you're declaring your first marriage over. It was more than just adultery. It was a public coup d'etat. The sources describe it as a bacchanal flutes playing, guests celebrating, Messalina wearing the traditional bridal veil, defiance blazing in her eyes.
She was essentially declaring Silius the new emperor, with herself as empress.
That's exactly how it would have been interpreted, a direct challenge to Claudius's legitimacy in his life.
Enter Narcissus, the freedman. He must have realized the danger immediately.
Instantly. If Silius and Messalina succeeded, Narcissus, as Claudius's loyal freedman, would be among the first to be executed. His survival depended on Claudius remaining emperor.
So what did he do? Send the message?
Couldn't risk it, too slow, too uncertain. He rode himself, flat out, from Rome to Ostia. He had to deliver the news in person, convey the urgency, the panic.
And Claudius's reaction?
Initially, apparently, he was hesitant, confused, but Narcissus was brilliant at manipulating him. He kept emphasizing the danger, the treason. Tacitus says Claudius returned to Rome that night, secretly, his face a mask of betrayal, terrified. Narcissus even reportedly arranged for an actress, one of Silius's supposed mistresses, to confess the plot to Claudius to really cement the idea.
Wow. Psychological warfare.
Totally. Keep the emperor scared and moving forward.
So, the confrontation in Rome, what happened?
Swift and brutal. The Praetorian Guard, loyal to Claudius, or maybe just to Narcissus at this point, stormed Silius's house. They found him, Messalina maybe, but crucially they found imperial treasures, gifts from Messalina, physical proof of their connection, and Silius's ambition. The purge started right then. Silius and his key supporters were arrested and likely executed immediately.
And Messalina, where was she?
She fled, ran to the gardens of Lucullus, a property that had belonged to her family, and it's there we get this really poignant, dark scene involving her mother, Domitia.
The politically savvy mother.
Always the pragmatist. Domitia found Messalina, probably hysterical, and according to Tacitus, she pressed a dagger into her daughter's hand.
Urging her to commit suicide.
Yeah. The traditional Roman noble way out. It offered a sliver of dignity, avoided the humiliation of a public execution, and maybe, just maybe, protected the future of Messalina's children, Britannicus and Octavia, by ending the scandal quickly.
But Messalina couldn't do it.
She hesitated. Tacitus describes her in tears, the dagger trembling. She faltered. For all her ruthlessness in politics in this final moment, facing her own death, she was terrified. A young woman, really.
And that hesitation.
It sealed her fate. A tribune sent by Narcissus or Claudius with absolute orders arrived. He saw her hesitate, knew the command, and struck her down with his sword.
Right there in the gardens.
Right there, blood soaking into the fancy, manicured earth. The end was swift and brutal.
And Claudius. How did he react when he found out she was dead?
This is maybe the most chilling detail. Tacitus reports that later, while he was having dinner, Claudius simply asked why the empress wasn't joining him. His voice was apparently devoid of warmth. No grief, maybe just relief. The political problem was solved.
And then came the final nail in the coffin, the damnatio memoria.
Yes. The Senate officially decreed it. Her statues were pulled down, smashed. Her name was literally chiseled off every monument, every inscription, all across the vast Roman Empire. An official attempt to erase her completely from history. The empress who flew too close to the sun was officially canceled.
We spent a lot of time on the high drama, the palace intrigue, Messalina's rise and fall, big personalities, big scandals. But to really get the full picture of Roman power, we have to shift focus now deliberately. We need to turn towards the darkness, the stories that weren't told loudly, if at all.
Yeah, this is the other side of the coin. The institutionalized cruelty that underpinned the whole system. We have to talk about the plura delicati.
It's a crucial transition, isn't it? Because the same absolute power that let Messalina order a consul's death without trial is the same power that allowed for the routine exploitation, the torture even of children.
Exactly. The term itself, plura delicati, it translates roughly as many delights or luxuries, which is just a grotesque euphemism, isn't it, for male concubines, boys used for sexual pleasure.
And these weren't adults choosing a profession. The sources are clear. These were boys, often incredibly young, sometimes only 10, 12 years old.
Shockingly young. And they were acquired like property, they were commodities, sourced from all over the empire.
How were they sourced?
Various ways. Many were captives from military campaigns. Imagine boys dragged from newly conquered villages in Britain, hair matted with mud, terrified. Or bought in slave markets in Alexandria, Gaul, Judea, anywhere the empire touched. They'd be inspected like animals, checked for beauty, build, signs of compliance.
Prodded like livestock. Terrific to imagine. And then groomed for what? The imperial baths? Private parties?
All of the above, prepared for the use of the elite. And the most disturbing examples, the most institutionalized examples, come from the reign of Emperor Tiberius.
Claudius's predecessor, the one who retreated to Capri.
Exactly. Around 27 AD, Suetonius tells us Tiberius basically set up this private kingdom on the cliffs of Capri. It wasn't just a retirement home.
What was it then?
It was a place where his darkest desires were catered to. Suetonius describes him housing literal troops of these young boys. Gridges is the Latin word, like flocks in villas and specially designed grottos. Fair-haired German boys, dark-eyed Syrian boys.
And what did they do?
They were trained to perform for him, specific choreographed movements and acts, often in these grottos, likely involving water features. It was all for his pleasure. The scale of it implies this massive, hidden supply chain trafficking children.
And submission wasn't just expected, it was often surgically ensured, wasn't it? Castration.
Horrifyingly common, yes. It wasn't random cruelty, it was calculated. The surgeon's knife was used to preserve a boy's youthful appearance, prevent puberty, and critically enforce subservience, make them physically and psychologically dependent.
What was that like for the boys?
After the surgery itself, weeks of recovery, often in dim, isolated cells, and they were trained relentlessly to suppress any sign of pain, fear, or defiance. Seneca, the philosopher, wrote about this later in his letters. He talks about these youths trained to endure nightly torments, how their smiles were just masks for dread.
Masks for dread, that's powerful.
Right?
And resistance. What happened if they fought back?
The lash, routinely. Or worse, banishment to the mines, which was basically a death sentence, hard labor, disease, cave-ins. There was no escape.
And Roman law offered absolutely no protection.
None. Slaves were property, rays, things, tools, whether for labor or for pleasure. Their consent was utterly irrelevant, a concept nobody in power would even consider. It's a horrifying blind spot in their legal and moral system.
This systemic cruelty, it seems to reach some kind of awful peak, almost performance art, under Nero.
Yeah, Nero takes it to another level of grotesque public display. Around 67 AD, he becomes obsessed with a young boy named Sporus.
Why Sporus?
Apparently because Sporus bore an uncanny resemblance to Nero's dead wife, Poppaea Sabina, whom Nero had probably killed. It was a twisted fixation.
And what did Nero do to him?
The sources describe this public or semi-public ritual. Sporus was formally castrated. Imagine the ceremony of the emperor presiding, the blood. Then Nero dressed Sporus in the clothes of an empress, veils, jewelry, the whole imperial regalia.
Dressed him as a woman, as his dead wife.
Yes, and then he married him in some ceremony, paraded him through Rome as his wife, forced him to endure public appearances, even kisses in the forum, presented as the empress.
It's the complete destruction of an identity, isn't it? Imposing this terrifying fantasy onto a real person.
Utterly.
Yeah.
And Sporus's life after Nero's fall in 68 AD was tragic. He was passed around between other powerful men, basically treated as a curiosity, a living embodiment of Nero's depravity. He couldn't escape the infamy.
What happened to him in the end?
Suicide. It's recorded as his final act, perhaps the only way he felt he could reclaim any agency after having his identity so brutally erased and rewritten.
And all this is happening despite, sometimes, laws against these things. You mentioned Domitian banned castration.
He did, formally, around 82 AD. But the hypocrisy is blatant. We know from poets like Martial that Domitian's own favorite boy, Erinus, was castrated. The law was likely just for show, a veneer of morality. The practice continued among the elite.
He was just too embedded in the culture.
Deeply embedded. Quintilian, the famous orator and teacher, even remarks on parents openly showing off these beautiful exploited boys to their own children at home, normalizing it, cementing it in the next generation. The silence around the suffering of the plura delicati, it really was, as you said, a scream no one heard, lost beneath the noise and drama of figures like Messalina.
So we've explored these two narratives today. On one hand, the spectacular, very public rise and fall of Empress Messalina, all politics, ambition, scandal.
High-stakes drama played out on the world stage.
And on the other hand, this hidden, constant, grinding horror endured by the plura delicati, silent suffering, institutionalized abuse.
And the key takeaway, really, is that these aren't separate stories. They're completely intertwined. They're two faces of the exact same Roman power structure.
How so?
Well, the absolute power that allowed Messalina to eliminate rivals with impunity, to potentially command actors like Nestor, that's the same systemic power that created and sustained the market for child slaves, that allowed emperors to mutilate boys like Sporus. It's all rooted in the same principle. The powerful can do whatever they want to the powerless.
The city of marble and blood, as they say.
Exactly. And think about Messalina's contest, that legend of endurance, whether it's true or just Agrippina's propaganda. And then think about the daily endurance forced upon those boys in Tiberius's grottos.
Both reflect a world obsessed with power, with pushing limits, with consumption, but completely discarding humanity in the process.
Right. Desire, whether for political power, for sexual gratification, for control, it fueled everything.
Yep.
It led to Messalina's brief glory and her very sudden ruin, and it condemned those boys to lives devoid of autonomy from the moment they were captured or sold.
The cost of empire.
Yeah.
Paid in flesh and fear. Underneath all the victory parades and the fancy villas.
That's it, exactly.
This whole deep dive, it really forces you to confront how absolute power functions, doesn't it? How easily it can erase or twist identity. Messalina gets the damnatio memoria, her name literally scraped off stone.
Well, the boys often didn't even have names recorded. They were dehumanized from the start, treated as objects. Their erasure was quieter, more insidious, but just as total in its own way.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening.
Yeah.
Consider this connection. That not a fear in the stomach of a palace servant when they heard the Praetorians marching unexpectedly.
Yeah.
That sudden, cold certainty that your life could end right now. That fundamental terror. It wasn't so different, was it, from the constant baseline fear that must have governed every single moment for those boys hidden away on Capri or paraded through Rome? The methods differed wildly, but the underlying reality of absolute unaccountable power dictating your fate, that was universal for those caught in its shadow.
A really profound point. The fear was the same, whether you were near the throne or at the absolute bottom.
Messalina's name was deliberately attacked, almost obsessively removed by her political rivals. But maybe it's the silence surrounding the countless unnamed victims, the plura delicati, that represents the deeper, darker, more enduring legacy of that Roman world built on power without limits.
A chilling thought to end on.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into, well, the brutal heart of Rome.